Today is very exciting for us to welcome Daniel to join us for this colloquium lecture. Professor Daniel Agbiboa is an associate professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, and he's a faculty associate of the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, an affiliate of the Harvard Bloomberg Center for Cities, and the co-chair of the Urban Conservation Series and the Mahindra Humanities Center. His research explores urban and security governance in contemporary Africa, focusing on the relationship between state and non-state actors. Professor Agbiboa has authored acclaimed books, including They Eat Our Sweat, published by Oxford University Press in 2022, and Mobility, Mobilization, and Counterinsurgency, published by University of Michigan Press in 2022, which received the Lee and Fuji Best Book Award and the ISA P-Section Best Book Award. He's a recipient of the Clarence Stone Scholar Award from the American Political Science Association, the H.F. Guggenheim Distinguished Scholar Award, and the CFAR Azrieli Global Scholars Award under its Humanities Urban Future program. He also serves on the editorial boards of the African Studies Review and the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research. So please join me in welcoming Professor Agbiboa for this lecture.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Natasha, Sophie, everyone who's made this visit possible. For a while, for a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it when suddenly before boarding, they announced that all flights are grounded because there was some technological failure in DC. Eventually it was fixed, but at the cost of my flight being missed, and my 5:20 flight was therefore became 10:25. But not to worry, I found myself a good lounge, got some good food, and started working. So I'm glad to be here with you all. So this talk is part of a book that I'm writing called Dredged Lives, and uses that as a metaphor for understanding the impact of urban speculation and expansionist activities on the margins of the city. The talk probably has some repetitions. So if you notice them, as I know you will, just do me a favor and don't call them repetition, right? Call them emphasis. So just think there's a design plan behind it. Okay. So I'll speak for about 50 minutes, roughly, and hopefully we'll have questions. So in July 2023, I toured the private Eko Atlantic City under the guidance of Ngozi, a sharply dressed environmental marketer whose polished British accent seemed meticulously crafted to persuade. In Eko Atlantic, appearance or packaging, as they say in Lagos, is everything. Aboard our coastal shuttle, I surveyed the desolate, almost ghostly landscaping of the emerging city. We paused at the so-called Great Wall of Lagos before continuing down Eko Boulevard, an 8-lane thoroughfare heralded as Lagos's grandest avenue in the making, a supposed rival to Paris's Champs-Élysées or New York's Fifth Avenue, though still far from realizing such grandeur. Ngozi bragged that all the who is who in Nigeria today own properties in Eko Atlantic, and that the US consulate has acquired multiple plots. She returned to this point ad nauseum, as if to legitimize the Eko Atlantic project. Yet as the shuttle rolled past empty boulevards and silent, unfinished towers, Eko Atlantic began to dissolve before my eyes, not into the future, but into something else. A shimmering architectural mirage, dazzling from afar, hollow at its core. As we concluded our tour, Ngozi's enthusiasm dimmed when she realized I was not a potential buyer, but an academic researcher. Her disappointment was telling. Eko Atlantic is a citadel of coastal exclusivity, designed for an esoteric few, some 250,000 affluent residents, most from outside Nigeria. It is seductively marketed as the city to live and work in, with its tree-lined boulevards, waterways, manicured gardens, 8 elegant plazas, 3 marinas, and a stunning oceanfront promenade. The new ocean city is promoted as the very antithesis to Lagos's overcrowded, traffic-choked streets. In one of its 24-story residential towers, the Eko Towers, 2- and 3-bedroom flats sell for $700,000 US dollars to $3 million US dollars. This in a country where the annual average income for a middle-class family of 4 falls anywhere between $14,000 and $29,000 US dollars. The exorbitant prices and choice amenities relegate most of Lagos's 20 million residents, especially those in nearby waterfront communities, to the status of recognized strangers, described by Sarah Mead in her book, Strange Encounters, as those who are in their proximity already recognized as not belonging, as being out of place. A stark reminder of their alienation from this so-called Dubai of Africa. The idea of Lagos as a city of the future has long seduced architects, urban theorists, and colonialists alike. The Dutch architect Rem Koolhaas, who visited Lagos in 2001, famously described the megacity as not a kind of backward situation, but an announcement of the future. Though initially meant to celebrate the inventiveness and improvisational creativity of ordinary Lagosians, there are countless ways of making do and making a mark. Koolhaas's vision has since been co-opted by urban elite and developers. They now wield it as a license to frame the city through a futuristic, aestheticized lens, a kind of blueprint utopia that detaches urban possibility from lived reality. But beneath this lies a cruel urban logic, one where aesthetics veils expulsion. Ecological risk is privatized, and elite visions become tools of erasure and spatial reinscription. In this talk, I argue that Eko Atlantic does not represent a model of urban sustainability, but rather exemplifies a new form of exclusionary climate urbanism, one that deepens social and spatial inequalities while marginalizing Lagos's downwardly mobile majority. By centering the concept of the surrounds, I explore how this elite-driven project accumulates and legitimates through both the violent displacement of ordinary Lagosians and the effacing of social memory, even as it markets itself as a sustainable response to climate vulnerability. Far from addressing the urgent and real risks posed by rising seas, Eko Atlantic produces a spatialized logic of climate segregation, where safety becomes a luxury and exposure a condition of class. African cities are increasingly remade by aggressive urban renewal campaigns that fetishize markets, privilege the wealthy, and fuel what Julie Livingstone aptly calls self-devouring growth. These elite-driven projects, cloaked in the seductive rhetoric of smart cities, green aesthetics, and world-class urbanism, they align external visions with local technocratic interest, displacing the poor and enacting a triple loss of property, personhood, and memory. As embodiments of elite aesthetics and experimentation, the new urban agenda undermines the everyday work of urban peripheral care and its minor reparative act, constricting the very possibility of life for many. For the elite, urban renewal campaign promised to arrest Africa's so-called urbanization without development, reimagining its not-quite cities as gateways for international investors and showpieces for ambitious politicians. For subaltern populations, however, urban renewal is more often experienced as dislocation, as radical uncertainty. Many are witnessing their spaces of survival, maneuver, and sociability cordoned off and earmarked for the privatized building of a modernist African city still yet to come. For these fungible subjects, the city is not a site of promise or rebirth, but disjuncture between the actual and the possible, a fissure that mirrors the contradictory nature of modernity itself in its simultaneous capacity to expand and deflate expectations. So I ask, can an imagined urban future surrounded by living ruins hold any promise of real transformation? Indeed, what can be learned from maintaining within the frame of urban analysis that which has been ruined, displaced, cast out, dredged out? Can an urban future be envisioned and designed that does not involve the restless and restive surrounds of humans and modern humans that stitch the city together? On a flight from N'Djamena, Chad, to Abuja in Nigeria, I flipped through an Askai duty-free magazine, skimming the latest trends. The front page bore a bold headline, Lagos. Its opening lines immediately caught my attention. City of all contrast. Eko, as Nigerians call Lagos, can seduce as much as irritate. City of ultra-rich and very poor, it will not leave you indifferent. The description reminded me of Wole Soyinka's Unsinkable City essay, where he portrays Lagos as exerting a secretive, sometimes resented, but tenacious hold on all who pass through its steamy street and tumultuous market. Lagos, he writes, preoccupies, agitates, repels, and seduces. Both descriptions capture the city's alluring paradoxes, its blend of affection and disaffection, expectation and deflation that make Lagos at once familiar and strange. With a population nearing 24 million, most self-described hustlers, Lagos is projected to become one of the world's 3 most populous cities by 2050. Over half of its landmass is wetlands, a fact that gestures towards the city's name. As historian Christine Mann notes, the name Lagos, first used by Europeans to describe the large island in the lagoon, and later the city itself, traces back to lago or lake, as marked on early Portuguese maps. No known 16th century Portuguese or Dutch voyages mentioned settlements on Lagos Island, despite the fact that several traveled in the vicinity, an indication of the contemporary insignificance of the villages, mostly small fishing communities, are located there. Of this low-lying city, Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie recently observed, I like, though, that nothing about Lagos was crafted for the tourist, nothing done to appeal to the visitor. Eko Atlantic City would beg to differ. A hyper-ambitious private city rising along Lagos's upscale Babbage area, Eko Atlantic spans 6.5 million square meters of land reclaimed, in their own words, seemingly out of thin air. Its footprints rivals that of Manhattan's skyscraper district. While some hail it as the Manhattan of West Africa, others cast their gaze further east, branding it Africa's future Hong Kong. These analogies are not mere metaphors. They are aspirational coordinates in a global geography of urban prestige. Eko Atlantic is shielded by the so-called Great Wall of Lagos, an 8.5 kilometers long coastal revetment engineered to withstand even the most extreme tidal surges for the next 1,000 years. At least so they claim. Privately funded by South Energy X Nigeria Limited, a subsidiary of the powerful Nigeria-based Shaguri Group of questionable integrity. Eko Atlantic prides itself in having conducted a full and comprehensive environmental impact assessment as required by the Nigerian government. On its website, Eko Atlantic promotes itself as a, quote, modern and efficient city that serves as a bulwark against the corrosive ecological effects in Lagos. Eko Atlantic traces its history to 2003, when the Lagos state government was in desperate search of a solution to protect Babbage from severe coastal erosion and to safeguard Victoria Island from flooding. Enter Eko Atlantic as a kind of saving grace, a futuristic urban spectacle that promises to mitigate coastal erosion while resolving Lagos's real estate deficit. Touted as Africa's new financial capital, Eko Atlantic joins a wave of private city projects across the continent. Tatu City in Nairobi, Hope City in Accra, City of the River in Kinshasa, Akon City in Senegal, the list goes on and on. Beyond Africa, similar elite cities have emerged. Malaysia's Iskandar, South Korea's Songdo, Abu Dhabi's Mazda, America's Sun City, and China's Nanhui. These gleaming standardized enclaves epitomize the worlding of African cities, where urban futures are imagined through external reference points, detached from the life worlds of their inhabitants. This form of worlding gives rise to what scholars call plug-in urbanism, a critique of the homogenizing urban master plans currently in vogue across Africa. These projects arrive prepackaged as self-evident solutions to urban challenges, yet they remain detached from the specific socio-spatial dynamics of the city they seek to transform. They work against rather than with the flow of the African city. The worlding of African cities is deeply entwined with what Kate Derrickson terms the unbearable whiteness of urban studies, an epistemic hierarchy that privileges Western geography, grammar, and citational practices. As Ananya Roy asks, can one dare to write an article on the right to the city in Brazil without reference to David Harvey or Henry Lefebvre? Will it be published even if it ignores the significant writings of Brazilian scholars, especially if these are in Portuguese? It is such epistemic bias rooted in a narratively condemned status of Black cities that has inspired some critical post-colonial urbanists to demand the decolonization and rewilding of urban studies through the development of theories, grammars, and questions from the South. Originating from a historical double consciousness shaped by colonial ideas of empire, civilization, and spatial sanitary norms, Eko Atlantic is essentially a worlded domain. Its vision is clear: to position Nigeria as a top 20 global economic power. This ambition aligns with the triumphant narrative of Africa Rising, which contains both the transformative promise of growth and its deep contradictions. It reclaims Africa as what Homi Bhabha once called an eccentric location, central to global desire, yet always just off-center. Eko Atlantic's significance lies less in its relationship to those who might live or work in the surrounds, and more in how it performs on the global stage, aligning aspirationally with other so-called world-class cities. In this sense, fantasy urbanism becomes a mirror of Africa's uneven globalization, an acute awareness of the material wealth of the global elite, even as true access to such wealth remains ever more elusive. The worlding of Eko Atlantic and of post-1999 technocratic era in Lagos was symbolically affirmed in 2013 when former US President Bill Clinton attended its dedication ceremony alongside then Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. According to Clinton, Eko Atlantic was a triumph of the human spirit, one that would allow, and I quote, Nigerians to choose where they wish to live. That this choice begins at $710,000 per flat is apparently beside the point. Successive Nigerian leaders have since staked their political legacies on the project's success. In their telling, Eko Atlantic is not a city of walls, to quote Caldera, but a bold reclaiming of Africa's right to development. Does Africa not deserve shiny cities, they ask? Rhetorically, of course. Jonathan called the project, and I quote, a noble initiative, capable of restoring Nigeria's global image. He said, you cannot be hearing only ugly stories. Eko Atlantic is bringing us happiness. This happiness has come to stay. But who exactly is encompassed in this us? As Simone de Beauvoir reminds us, and I quote, it is not too clear just what the word happy really means, and still less what true value it may mask. What is clear, however, is that the promise of happiness as a tool of urban future making has long served to rationalize spatial segregation and the expulsion of undesirable bodies. Yet Eko Atlantic's outsized ambition should not distract from how its elite fantasies are deeply entangled with the hopes of the surrounding waterfront communities. Lagos, after all, is a megacity where dreams are central to a central mode of self-making. Its residents are cruelly optimistic hustlers, drawn to the very structures they critique, often aspiring to the same symbols of wealth and modernity that exclude or exploit them. Though many Lagosians express concern about Eko Atlantic, nearly all of them also speak to the importance of Lagos getting nice new buildings. They want their city to be modern, to be shiny. While much of the literature critiques the fantasy of master planned cities, I want to insist on attending to these entangled zones that sustain and haunt them, the surrounds, as both wounds and world-making site. Beneath Eko Atlantic's promise of happiness lies the precarities and informal economies of its surrounds. shoreline communities and settlements grappling with the ecological fallout of dredging, land filling, and relentless construction. These areas constitute the urban surrounds, spaces that operate both within and beyond state capture. They are the city's shadowlands where elite fantasies manifest as nightmares for the urban poor. In these zones, subalterns are written out of economic narratives, treated as disposable by planners, expelled from their homes, and rendered invisible by urban renewal campaigns that frame them as fodder for the proof of development dreams. Life in the surrounds is invariably provisional, dwelling, liminal, and social life perpetually tentative, confined to the ever-shifting peripheries. Those who inhabit these surrounds are trapped in a condition of permanent temporariness, an incessant state of preparedness. Their trajectories are lateral rather than upward, circulatory rather than transformative. The surrounds are bastions of the unpeople, those rendered illegible within the dominant order of the sensible. As Jacques Rancière describes, they are the part of those that have no part, the excluded who paradoxically become the privileged subject of political rupture. Rancière urges us to understand the partition of the sensible in its double meaning, as both a system of separation and exclusion, and paradoxically, as the very mechanism that makes participation possible. This paradox plays out in the surrounds, which are neither sites of full inclusion nor outright exclusion, but rather spaces of predatory inclusion. Kianga Yamata Taylor uses the term in Race for Profit to describe the adverse incorporation of low-income African Americans into federal housing policy during the late 60s and early 70s. Taylor argues that federal housing policy shifted from exclusionary redlining to predacious financial practices that targeted African Americans, benefiting the real estate industry while exacerbating racial banishment. Indeed, Blackness forms the understructure of the surrounds, signifying a condition of perpetual liminality and exposure, an existence between the habitable and the uninhabitable. This duality is also evident in how the surrounds function as sites of collective organizing and social imagination, what Rancière calls properly political act. Those acts that rupture the settled order of things. That rupture takes place when the surrounds, in the words of Rancière, make themselves seen, and in so doing, render visible, even for a brief moment, the lie of the order, the neoliberal order. The surrounds are the necessary precondition for the emergence and the legitimation of city doubles, privately built cities designed in deliberate contrast to the crime, decay, and dysfunction of the urban margins. One local publication captured this binary succinctly, praising Eko Atlantic as everything that Lagos is not. This dynamic mirrors the broader global order. Just as the developed world derives its prestige from the underdeveloped world, so too do world-class cities gain meaning in contrast to third world cities. Where the surrounds are marked by unregulated traffic, the futuristic cities boast well-ordered speed. Where crime haunts the margins, the private city promises 24-hour surveillance. Where one is scarred by infrastructural voids, the other gleams with luxury. Where one is weighed down by history and implicated subject, the other emerges ex nihilo, out of nothing. If the margins demand improvised survival, the private city offers an at-your-service lifestyle. In short, it is this logic of conviviality, the entangled dynamics of order and chaos, that inscribes both the high modernist city and its surround within the same epistemic field. Put another way, the juxtaposition of Eko Atlantic, all order and comfort, and the surrounds of Lagos Island, all chaos and immiseration, doesn't just mark the distance between the two, it also marks their intimate and threatening proximities. The cruel irony of Eko Atlantic is that those excluded from, or rather predatory included within its environs, bear the heaviest burden of this modernist master plan. Just beyond the opulence of Eko Atlantic, nearly 2/3 of Lagosians live in precarious, underserved neighborhoods, many clustered along the city's peripheries. In a city undergoing rapid urban development, the persistence of such informal settlements raises an urgent question. Who is this development actually for? Or perhaps the real issue, as William Gibson once quipped, the real issue is that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. Eko Atlantic transforms climate adaptation into climate violence. As developers reclaim land from the sea for luxury living, neighboring waterfront communities watch their homes vanish under rising tides, their land dissolving into the ocean. Even the dead are not spared. Cemeteries have been swallowed by the sea, a grim testament to whose survival matters in this space. Climate urbanism in Lagos cannot be separated from land economy, from a context where land is scarce, coveted, and routinely weaponized against the poor. Fraud is so endemic to land ownership that nearly every wall in Lagos bears the warning. This land is not for sale. Beware of 419. 419 being the constitution that refers to advance fee fraud. The booming demand for sharp sand, fueled by elite real estate ventures such as Eko Atlantic, has turned coastal communities into extractive frontiers. The result, flooding, ecological destruction, and the erosion of traditional livelihood. But modern land is being lost. Whole communities and histories are being erased. One resident of Alpha Beach put it plainly: the ship is permanently dredging. They use sand from our communities to build Eko Atlantic and big man mansions. Another added, this is the third village. The first is in the ocean, the second gone. Now we are standing on what's left of the third. All the land our fathers left us, gone. There is no more development. It is a brutal kind of alchemy, where the destruction of the poor and their life worlds becomes the foundation of elite dreams. As Abdulmalik Simon puts it, the uninhabitable is the very condition of the inhabitable. On Bishop Koji Island, fisherman Ujemeji Thomas recounted to me how dredging machines have polluted the lagoon and driven away fish. My traps now return empty, he said. Across Koji and Otodogbame, residents echo the same arc of despair. Promises of progress and happiness give way to poisoned waters, lost homes, and forced evictions. Joseph Christopher lamented, "We were fishermen, but now even the water is not safe, and the dredgers don't hire us." The livelihoods that once anchored these communities have been buried beneath sand, destined for luxury enclaves. Others describe the destruction in cosmological terms. The water is angry. It's not God that is angry with us, it's human beings. This is not climate change, this is human hand. Their testimony cuts through technocratic narratives of resilience, laying bare the grief and dispossession that underpins this exclusionary climate urbanism. Makoko, Lagos's iconic stilt settlement, faces similar peril. Taiwo, the son of the community chief, pointed to the dredging machines offshore. He said, "If they sandfill Makoko, our people won't have a place to fish or survive. The government has done nothing for us. The only time we see politicians is during elections." His cynicism is shared widely. Recent report from Makoko Kubaba Corner confirmed ongoing dredging and land reclamation visible from the third mainland bridge, yet hidden from accountability. The violence is not limited to erosion. On March 7, 2025, Ilaje Otumara, a century-old riverside community in Lagos, was erased in hours. Over 9,000 people were forcibly evicted at dawn, their homes flattened by bulldozers, their belongings lost, their nakedness exposed. Torn from their rituals, their land, and their gods, they experienced what Anne Ulanov calls the upending of all our shore categories. A disorientation that feels eerily familiar in other parts of the world, not least in the US today. "In my twilight years, this is what they've done to me," said 62-year-old Bambadi. Another resident recalled, "They gave no notice. They just came and started beating people, demolishing homes." This echoes earlier evictions. In 2008, some 80,000 people were cleared from Babbage to make way for Eko Atlantic. Tear gas, fire, drownings, all for a city that was never built for them. These exclusions are not only local, they are part of a global system. As Lagos elite consolidate Eko Atlantic and Lagos Island, foreign investors and scholars, even students from the global north, move freely within its secured perimeters. Researchers often remain insulated in beachfront hotels such as Hilton and Radisson Blu, outsourcing the burdensome part of fieldwork to local academics. As Tilly and Kalina aptly put it, my flight arrives at 5 a.m. Can you pick me up? This sanitized experience of the city reproduces the same spatial privilege that fuels exclusionary urbanism. The point then is stark. Eko Atlantic's promise of protection is built on devastation. These projects do not plan for the poor, they plan them out. At best, they relocate poverty. The cruel irony of climate urbanism in Lagos is that it protects the elite from ecological catastrophe while exposing the vulnerable to its full force. How do the surrounds stake their claim in a city that refuses to see them? How do they force recognition of what Philip de Boer calls the raw urgencies of living? In the 1950s, low-income Lagos Island residents, those called Araiko, the body of Lagos, or what Halima Somoton calls popular planners, they leveraged colonial planning laws to challenge slum demolitions, forcing the development board, made up of British planners and Nigerian politicians, to amend their policies. Today, waterfront communities bordering Eko Atlantic deploy similar tactics, reaffirming a simple but often overlooked fact. Urban residents are not merely passive occupants of othered spaces, spaces created and controlled by others, but active and improvised agents shaping urbanization itself. In 2016, resistance moved to the courtrooms. The Legal Defense and Assistance Project, or LEADAP, sued in Nigeria's Federal High Court, arguing that Eko Atlantic threatened to displace fishing communities and destroy marine ecosystems. Their case echoed Julie Livingstone's call to account for the entangled lives of humans, animals, plants, and minerals that so-called progress devours. Under the aegis of the umbrella body, the Nigerian Slum and Informal Settlements Federation, a collective declaration from the waterfront communities resisted attempts by the federal government to criminalize them, insisting that our communities are full of law-abiding, if impoverished, residents of Lagos State. We belong to the city and have a right to the city as well as a right to shelter and to livelihood. You can read the rest. Yet as of this writing, the case remains stalled, suffocated by Nigeria's so-called fantastic culture of corruption and bureaucratic red tape. These legal efforts are not abstract. They emerge from the brutal immediacy of survival. In Otumara, one resident described living in a state of constant fear. He said, "We don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. Everybody is afraid. We don't know the day and time it will happen." She recounted the anxiety of possible demolition, the weight of inherited land, and the uncertainty hanging over every market hall. Her fear is not hers alone. It is shared by mothers, by youth, by elders, and community leaders who watch helplessly as land once transformed from swamp becomes disposable again. Still, the lawsuit stands as a defiant demand, a legal and political cry from those whom Eko Atlantic seeks to excise from the urban map. In a Lefebvrean sense, these demands and cries represent different modes of claiming space. The demand, as Marcus argues, comes from those directly in want, directly oppressed, those for whom even their most immediate needs are not fulfilled. The cry, on the other hand, emerges from those superficially integrated into the capitalist system and sharing in its material benefits, but constrained in their opportunities for creative activity, oppressed in their social relationship, unfulfilled in their life's hope. A fundamental pillar of Lefebvre's right to the city is the right to participate in shaping the urban landscape. From the outset, the residents of the surrounds, those occupying the uninhabitable, were excluded from Eko Atlantic's planning, reinforcing their non-status within the undemocratic governance of private cities. When the Eko Atlantic project was about to commence, none of us were called, lamented the chief of Okun Alpha waterfront community. They have to call us. We have to share our experience. This disregard for the social lives, the spatial practices, and yes, the citizen science of the surrounds mirrors a long history of marginalization. Indeed, the indigenous residents of old Lagos were systematically excluded from top-down effort to carve out a new Lagos, as far back as the 1880s. Old Lagos historian Adelusi Adeluyi tells us, was a placeholder for everything that was seen as wrong with the city, a condition to be flattened for modernity to arrive. While developers at Eko Atlantic boast of the Great Wall of Lagos, residents argue it merely redirects storm surges, worsening floods and coastal erosion. Residents of Okun-Afa, for instance, describe how the sea has encroached upon their land at an alarming rate. The community has relocated 3 times because of ocean surges, one resident explained. The other 3 places are now buried deep inside the ocean. Our former homes belong to mermaids. Unregulated dredging only amplifies the devastation. Fishermen report that dredgers arrive under the cover of night and sometimes even in broad daylight to extract sand from the ocean bed at Okun-Afa, repurposing it for land reclamation at Eko Atlantic. This deepens the ocean floor near shoreline settlement, causing waves to break closer to land and intensifying coastal erosion. Over the last decade, residents claim Okun-Afa has been halved in size, with properties once far from the shore now perilously close to the water's edge, and they have pictures to show for it. In Kuramo community, fishermen lament widening catches, attributing the disruption to ecosystem damage caused by Eko Atlantic's land reclamation exercises. Many now venture further out to sea, increasing both fuel costs and occupational risks. They describe how mud from the reclamation site is suffocating marine life, damaging their net and threatening their very livelihood. As this fisherman told me, our fishing now is local, just small canoes. It's not commercial, it's subsistence. We fish only to feed our families. It's no longer a business. This imposed precarity casts residents beyond propertied citizenship, trapping them in what Laura Beland calls survival time, a condition of ceaseless crisis, struggling, drowning, treading water, clinging to the ledge, never stopping. Eko Atlantic is the flagship of Lagos's post-1999 neoliberal push for world-class status, a glittering emblem of urban transformation built atop ruination. After decades of military-era neglect, the Lagos state government sought to rebrand the city as a globally competitive megacity. The administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is now the president, and Babatunde Raji Fashola spearheaded sweeping urban reforms to attract foreign investment, expand infrastructure, and modernize governance. Tinubu's tenure laid the groundwork for Lagos's fiscal autonomy, overhauling taxation, fostering private sector partnership, and revitalizing Lagos's island after years of underdevelopment. Fashola, his predecessor, doubled down, branding Lagos as, quote, Africa's Big Apple, a global investment magnet. A government film showcased this vision, a vibrant megacity, a world of unique possibilities where untold opportunities are never far away. Yet beneath the promise of transformation lay a campaign of mass displacement. Informal settlements were raised without resettlement plans. Street vendors were forcibly evicted, and working class communities were banished in the name of urban beautification. Branded as modernization, these measures were less about transformation than about spectacle, erasing symptoms rather than addressing structural causes of congestion and disorder. International media hailed Fashola's governance. The New York Times called Lagos a model city. The London-based economists describe it as, and I quote, a lesson in how one big city can sometimes kickstart wider change. But beneath this glowing endorsement lay a grimmer truth. Lagos's government viewed informality not as an asset, but as a disease to be eradicated. And I know this because I've studied informal transport over the last 10 years. Instead of engaging informal workers, the administration conflated informality with illegality. Evictions became acts of enforced exile, rendering thousands stateless in their own city, from street beggars to mobile hawkers, the homeless. One Lagosian put it bluntly, making Lagos a mega city doesn't mean banishing the poor. Another displaced resident lamented, they want a Lagos that glitters, but forget that Lagos is Lagos because of its people. They are doing this with no regard for those who call this city home. It reminds me of the famous article by Chinua Achebe called simply Africa is People. Behind Lagos's glittering language of modernization and global competitiveness lies a ruthless logic of neoliberal regime. As Wendy Brown, the political theorist, warns, neoliberalism is the rationality through which capitalism finally swallows humanity. In Lagos, that swallowing takes the form of evictions, erasures, and a systematic war on the urban poor. The state's vision of a world-class city is premised on disappearance of street hawkers, informal workers, those they qualify as undesirable. A stark example is Makoko, Lagos's iconic floating community, which was erased in flame, demolished just 72 hours after an eviction notice. State crews touched homes and businesses, making clear the government's disregard for the survival strategies of the city's most vulnerable. The official justification was revealing, and I quote, "The Lagos state government is desirous of restoring amenity and value to the waterfront and improving the waterfront coastline to underline the megacity status of the state," end of quote. In 2016, over 30,000 residents of Otudogbame and Iluprin watched their homes crumble under bulldozers. Some drowned trying to escape police gunfire. One of the most chilling instances occurred on 9 April 2017 when the Lagos State Task Force invaded Otudogbame at dawn, unleashed bullets and tear gas into the morning air. With the landward entrance blocked, residents fled into the lagoon in boats. As they drifted in fragile flotillas, security forces fired into the water, doused structures with kerosene, and set homes ablaze. By evening, the area had been razed. Many spent the night adrift, homeless, traumatized, stranded in the city's waters. At least 2 young men were shot, one fatally in the neck. The message was unmistakable. There is no refuge for the poor, not on land, not on water. For these restless subjects and petrified lives, the waterfront represent home, work, survival. Forced eviction means they lose everything, their livelihood, their possession, and in some cases, their lives. Despite court injunction halting evictions, the demolitions continued unabated. Again, echoes of what is happening right now in the US today with regards to deportation. For these restless subjects and petrified lives, the waterfront is not just geography, it's home. Even when the court intervenes, demolitions, they press on. The law, it seems, offers no shield. In an earlier wave of attack, residents of Otudogbame testified to an eerily familiar pattern: unannounced dredging, escalating violence, and then destruction. "We were living here before the big buildings came," said the local chief, Baale Danso Hunkwe. "But they treated us like dogs because our homes were made of bamboos. We were seen as disposable." The state justified the eviction as part of its megacity plan, but residents argued the real motive was land acquisition for high-value sand dredging and real estate speculation. These were not accidental displacement. They were calculated sacrifices. As Celestine Ahisu, a youth leader, stated, "They started dredging in 2014. Houses began falling into the water. When we protested, they came back with thugs and police, set everything ablaze, opened fire on fleeing family. Our land became battlefield. And now we squat in Makoko, wondering when it will be our turn again." Now, final section. From the surrounds, the fantasy of the world-class city dissolves into the nightmares of abjection. James Ferguson, the late anthropologist, captures the brutality of expulsion. It is not a matter of being merely excluded from a status to which one never had a claim, but of being expelled, cast out, and down by the formation of a new or newly impermeable boundary. The abyss of expulsion is not just a metaphor. It is an ever-expanding frontier of dispossession, a shifting boundary that renders entire communities invisible. If the urban poor are cast out of the future city, where then do they drift? Lagos offers no middle ground, only a petrifying future that renders the displaced nameless, unseen, and unmoored from the city's promised modernity. In Edward Glissant's words, "The banks of the river have vanished on both sides of the boat. What kind of river then has no middle? Is nothing there but straight ahead? Is this boat sailing into eternity towards the edges of a non-world that no ancestors will hunt?" For the people of the surrounds, Lagos is no longer a city to navigate. It is an ocean to survive, an abyss that swallows without a trace. And yet, even here in the depths of the abyss, one can still hear the faint insistent cry of those who refuse to drown. They cry, their cry might sound like this, and I hear this too often. Where we are standing now is someone's property, it's now gone. Or we're begging them to stop the dredging ship. These are not just lamentations, they are claims to memory, to place, and the freedom to be and to do. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Daniel, for the very powerful talk. We will open up for questions, so please raise your hand.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Yifei Zhao. I'm a first-year MRP student, and my question is, how can planners better incorporate the lived experiences and local knowledge of the displaced or at-risk communities into the planning process, especially in the context of dominated by private capital?
I think planners must be ethnographers. They must find a way of being close to the pulse of what is going on the ground. I think too often the idea of planning itself, as I said, sort of escapes the messy politics of everyday life, of urban politics, the various stakeholders in those spaces, the bastions of authority in those spaces, the ballets, the chiefs, the unions, the youth groups, the women fishing communities. All of these people are often seen but not heard in planning descriptions. So what do? You have to listen. You have to engage. You have to take on the spirit of an ethnographer and be closer to these people and understand what they have. And when you do that, you quickly realize that their vision is not necessarily, it's not a clash of visions. They're not necessarily at odds. They wanted to want a shiny city, but they want to know what place they have within this city. But unfortunately, I think there's no space too often for these people, for these voices. And so my advice would be planners have to be ethnographers to engage more beyond the technicality of planning, with affect, with emotions, with feeling, with religion, with spirituality, with all of these, with grief and dispossession, all of these things. And that is not happening. It didn't happen when Lagos, for example, moved towards bus rapid transit system. And what they simply did was to say, these forms of informal transport, we are ashamed of them, not proud of them. This is not who we are. We are going to bring bus rapid transit system, the kind that we see in Bogota, the kind that we see in, the fourth class cities. What happened? The bus rapid transit system now look like the informal vehicles they were meant to replace. Because when you fight the system fights back.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Shonei. Thank you for your talk. So as you were speaking, I was thinking about the role that first and second Nigerian Americans have to play in the creation and also just like maintaining these elite cities. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on what, these first and second generation Nigerian Americans can do to prevent these kinds of harms from continuing?
Yeah, it's a great question because it gets at the part of doing something, and not just learning, but also doing something. And I've always said, when I was part of a Harvard group of researchers that recently came back, so we were looking at climate adaptation all the way from Cote d'Ivoire to the Delta, so Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria. And I said, I remember vividly, we were sitting with this group of fishing communities, and we're talking about the impact of sea level rise and coastal erosion on their livelihoods. And the older chief, the older man who was in charge of them just got up suddenly after 1 hour conversation and left. He was so upset. And so it was such a strange assembly. Eventually, when he came back, he said he was going to stop talking to us. because the only data they have is their words, and we are mining it without doing anything. So he wasn't satisfied for us to say we are researchers, we're going to publish about it. He says, go talk to the government. You have to do something about what is going on. And I think it's in that kind of sense of doing something that these generations will have to embrace. It's not enough to see situations of inequality and injustice. You must do something because the very seeing compels doing. And however you interpret that doing, it has to happen because this is the demand, the cry that is coming from the margins. That we not be content with just writing and publishing white papers and articles, that would go beyond that. And we might say, oh, I'm an academic, I'm not a lobbyist, I'm an academic, but they are compelling and demanding that we be that. And we have to embrace that doing culture. So I would say doing something, not being content with just learning, doing.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. My name is Guan Qi, second year of MRP student. So my question is about the environment and the pollution issues.
Yeah.
So do you think the nature-based solution can help it? Because environmental issues sometimes are also the social and economic issues too. So our planner could do something for it based on that.
I think nature-based solutions can certainly help, and there's strong evidence for that. I mean, when I mentioned citizen science is really what I had in mind. Unfortunately, the way in which the whole move towards climate change mitigation has happened, perhaps because it's the source of funding as well, rooted in global north, is that it almost feels as if it's for scientists. Anthropologists just go and weed the ground and scientists come and plant. That's how it seems. And in this sense, then it feels like the adaptation mechanisms that have been deployed, whether that is planting trees, whether that is even spiritual forms of communicating with the sea, like people had sort of interpretation of when the sea level rise and erosion, the sea is angry because there are foreign bodies inside it, like your dead body, like plastics. We need to do something to purify the sea. Those kinds of knowledge don't make it into a lot of the climate change summits that we have. Why? They are what Foucault might call subjugated knowledge, unofficial knowledge, knowledge that are not ranked as high enough to become scientific. But if we are to make progress, to go back to the first question, we would have to contend with those kinds of epistemologies, those kinds of ways, because people have believed. We're not coming to tell them something radically new. They've believed in piracy for centuries. And there's knowledge that is just left untapped. So I think nature-based solutions grounded in the memories, grounded in the cultures and traditions of people must expand and complement what we have. So it's not a case of throwing away the baby with bad water, it's a case of expanding and complementing. And it's through that hybrid forms of knowledge that we can begin to make headway.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ketki. I'm a first year MRP student. Thank you so much this is a very powerful talk, I must say. I just wanted to ask you about displacement because of gentrification is one thing that happens wherever you see development. If there is development, there will be someone who will be paying for it and it'll be very harsh. But what are there no laws that Africa has, or I'm just very curious, what are some existing guidelines which if a planner is doing something, of course participation is something that we could do, but we cannot frame the law. What are the guidelines, what are the laws, and if not, after this incidents, did anything spark up? Is something in process?
There are laws. Africa probably has the best laws on paper. Think about Angola, for example. I wonder any constitution that can compete with Angola's constitution, shiny South Africa, shiny constitutions. There's some kind of gap between what it says and what is actually happening. Right? The various scholars have sort of used various appropriate and inappropriate metaphors to describe the shadow state, for example, the state that operates beneath the state. The formal law, and there's the law, and then there's the law inside the law. I think there's a bigger issue beyond the law. When I traveled all through Cote d'Ivoire along the coast, what was very clear was that people were building on floodplains, for example. And I wondered, how is it that, there's the government and there's the law, and these buildings are happening right on floodplains where you're not supposed to build? But they're getting licensing, nobody's stopping them. So there's some sort of complicity on the part of the government. But also, people in the informal sector will come to you and say, my house was demolished, but look at the receipt. I have a receipt. So they'll show their receipt. My thing, and they hang on to this receipt to save their life. They have their life. Who gave out those receipts? Why are they not valid? So there is that part about what is the law in this space. The customary law, is it the law inside the law? But it was in 2016 when I was in Quito, Ecuador, for the new urban agenda. And I think it was line 2 or line 3 said, and I quote, we must formalize the informal. This was the UN. We must formalize, and was saying that to city governors, ambassadors, all of this. What message they hear at the highest level? Go and formalize the informal. So they went back and said, you know what, we're going to clear all these makeshift shelters because this is not befitting of what we are. So illegality is equivalent to informalities is equivocated with illegality. So in a sense, the law is there, but more often than not, it is symbolic. But people still appeal to the law to make claims. I'm not saying symbolic means that it is nothing, but it's just to say that the law is not enough as a prism through which to understand what is going on. Many of the livelihoods we are talking about are illegal, but socially legitimate. And those distinctions are not the same thing. You can talk about informal transport, for example, say they don't appear anywhere in the Constitution, but they are socially legitimate ways of making a living in everyday Africa. So those ethics of illegality, the distinction between what is socially legitimate law means that the law itself is insufficient in people's life, even though people still appeal to the law all the way through during the colonial times on the empire. The margins always used the law, even though they question it.
Thank you.
Hi. Hey, I'm Shreya. I'm a first-year MRP student. I have a question related to since we're understanding subaltern urbanism and we're trying to talk about legitimization, one of the biggest drivers that I see in this entire space is related to the political motive, political tools, and methodological means of really actualizing this. I just wanted to understand in the context of Africa and based on your research, what are certain essential tools or agencies that you see need to be happening right now, especially in the political and methodological frameworks of making it happen?
I think there needs to be a political, in Latin you say volte face, a turnaround in the way in which we think to walk with the flow of the city rather than against it. There's a sense in which some of the greatest innovations that African cities have come up with, the political elites themselves are embarrassed of those innovations. I gave the example of the transport sector. You would struggle to find a sector more creative than that sector. It takes, when I was growing up, I would see a minibus taxi called the Danfos, right? You have the equivalent matatus and daladalas and the rest. And I see a Mercedes-Benz logo. I say, okay, this is a Mercedes-Benz. But then I don't see anything that looks like this anywhere in the world. So they've taken something from elsewhere and they've recognized that this thing in its form does not fit the potholed roads that we may have here, not carry the amount of people that we have here. So we're going to take it to the workshop. We're going to discipline it to fit this context. and we're going to come up with something that can serve the people, can serve the roads that we have here. This is the same form of transport that the Lagos State governor says is an embarrassment. But there's a sense as well in which the downfalls themselves are mobile bodies of meaning. The minibuses, they connect to culture. If you look at Nigerian movies, they're about you rarely watch a Nollywood movie without seeing a downfall. Most academics would already publish a book on Africa without having this transport on their cover page, often without any kind of acknowledgement to these downfall drivers. But still, so they embody who we are in many sense, but at the same time, you know, we don't want to be associated with them. The Nigerian musician, Fela Kuti, calls it Kolo mentality. The mentality, and Du Bois calls it double consciousness, this sense of always, you know, thinking about the I through the eyes of the other. And unfortunately, that is the political transformation that would have to happen. But of course, you can bounce back and ask me, what is the political will to change a system that benefits the elite? And I don't know the answer to that. You can say the same thing of anything: corruption, lack of enforcement of the law. Why will a ruling cabal or a small group of people want to change a system that benefits them? And this is the question that I keep pondering all the time. What is the incentive? What is the will to do that? But there needs to be a political transformation, and we cannot find that, unfortunately, within the elite system itself. We have to find that in popular culture. We have to find that in the Afrobeat musicians who are singing about the system that is all gone, you know, right. We have to find that in the activist groups like NSAS who are moving and saying, you know, we want an end to this. We have to find that in the youth themselves who are deciding enough is enough, we're getting out. In Nigeria, you call it Jakba, running desperately. I think in China, you call it the run people. You know, people running desperately away from the system. That's where we have to find this critique. Within the political system itself, it's very difficult to see an answer. And whenever two or more Nigerians gather together, there's a breakout into a certain kind of lamentation. But Nigerians are cruel optimists. They will still come back and talk about it go better. Things will get better. Somehow things will get better. We will hustle our way out. So there's these ways in which politics maybe needs a little more injection from popular culture. The disconnect is very loud. And politicians need perhaps to become appreciative of things, to see innovation in a different light. And that might be some educational restructuring as well, because many of these elites as well had their education elsewhere. So again, we're in the realm of what education is for and what it does in these spaces. And I think that cuts into our own role as students as well. What do we do when we go to these spaces and interact with political officials? How do we interact with them? Do we come as fixers? Do we come as missionaries who are here to save? Or do we have the humility to learn from the context? To think, as Achille Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosopher, said, that we should not only study Africa from what it is not, but rather from what it is. That Africa is not, and we should learn to think about Africa on terms that warrant comparison with other places in the world. We're not there yet, but it's a great question.
Thank you for that talk, for humanizing instead of leaving it in the realm of abstraction.
Yeah.
So I'm Abhiram from the first year MRP. Two questions. One regarding politics again, like Nigeria is a multi-party democracy. Corrupt it might be, but still like political parties do function and elections do happen. So how does political mobilization happen at the level of informal settlements? Like back in India, we have powerful political groups which operate. Succeed or fail is a secondary, but whether groups are able to mobilize successfully in public and rally people to a cause, does that happen or not? And what influence do they have on the city government? One. And second, yesterday, incidentally, I was in another class where we read a paper on Eko Atlantic City, which spoke of how the city has not really grown as per expectations, and it's still in some kind of nascent or middle phase. So is there an unspoken fear that this project might fail and whatever was gone through has, so yeah.
Yeah, I think I've always been hopeful about the power to mobilize for change. But there's a certain fatigue that I notice when I talk to people now. And sometimes I don't I almost don't want to hear it when I'm on the field because I'm so colored by something is not going well, you mobilize and change happens. But what I'm hearing now is a sense that it will not happen. And I don't know if I want to hear that. But when I talk to people, there's a sense in which that hope, even that cruel optimism, is disappearing very fast. And people are saying, we have no chance against his formidable opponent. And so the language in Nigeria now is a language again, Japa. Well, get out when you can, desperately. And so I want to talk about mobilization is happening at the legal level, at the everyday level. You saw the banner, there are various groups. But the potential of this mobilization to leave a crack on the solid wall of oppression, I don't know. It's what Du Bois calls an unhopeful hope. A hope, not hopeless, but unhopeful, he calls it. And I think that's the kind of space that I'm in. And I'm thinking, should I write about this kind of unhopeful hope that I'm getting from the ground? When I think, well, why are you not mobilizing this here? You know, we've seen too much. And perhaps it's not something so radically new. When the young Nigerians marched out in the streets on the back of George Floyd to protest against police brutality, it was one of the biggest mobilization we've seen in Nigerian history. Define their appearance themselves. I grew up, my parents telling me, don't go to the street, don't go to the streets. If they are protesting, stay at home. Their memories embodied within them of violence that they carry and trauma, and they pass and say, it's not my child that will die for this place. But young people defied that warning. What happened? How did NSAS end? The police opened fire on these young people who were singing and dancing and to the national anthem, waving their national flag. Opened fire in the cover of darkness and shot them dead. Today, still no justice, right? And young people moved from a space of voice to exit. There's no chance here. So I think there's something there. And I think as human beings, we want to hang on to hope. But what happens when really the context itself is saying there's no hope here? How do we make sense of that? And I think that's the challenge that I have in thinking about it.
Hi, my name is Mercy. Also from Nigeria. I'm a graduate student of global development, and I've also worked in climate adaptation, and I also participated in some of these climate conferences. And one thing I've learned is climate infrastructures for climate adaptation. And through my lived experiences, maybe visiting Lagos, I think I want to argument climate urbanism as protecting the elites, because even Ikoyi, Banana Island, when it comes to flooding, they all feel the flooding. And in one of my visits to Landmark Event Center, I could see like the blocking of, I think, the beach to not reach Eko Atlantic. Yeah, and I'm wondering, how would you describe the infrastructures used in Eko Atlantic? Because I also feel like maybe in few years, this beach or this water is going to like maybe fill the land that they are building. So how would you describe the infrastructures? And my second question would be on alternative suggestion for people like in Makoko area, knowing that they have built a connection with the land and water that they are on. So if, for instance, the Lagos government bring alternatives like move to this place, do you think they will buy in or they want to stay in their land or waterfront? Thank you.
Two good questions on the infrastructure, right? Infrastructure. So Eko Atlantic claims that these boulders, this sea defense wall would last for 1,000 years. They got the idea from the Dutch. They tested it in Denmark, and they said, it is solid. There are rumors in and around when I was there that some houses have been flooded inside, but they are keeping it hush-hush. They don't want people to know. That's why people are not occupying it, but these are rumors. Rumors are always not nothing. I'm an anthropologist, or I'm an undercover anthropologist, so I usually would not dismiss that. But there are all these stories that were circulating But one thing was very clear. You can see when we had a film producer come with us, and he had his drone technology to look from the top, and you can see where the sea defense wall ends and where the surrounds. The clarity is like night and day. It's protecting infrastructures that matter. Whether that is the Dangote cement factory, whether that is the big man mansions, whether that those are the hotel chains, but you can see it begins here. And what happens then is that it diverts the water downstream to these surrounding communities. So they can tell with pictures, with memories, that since the construction of this place, you can see the water coming in. They talk about Chinese trawlers on their sea without any regulation from the government, swiping, their word, sand from underneath their homes and using it to go and build in place the point to these mansions elsewhere. So here you see the ways in which the people there are compelled to be infrastructure, as Simon says. The people become the infrastructure that stitch themselves together. In many cases, they can talk about the dreams of their ancestral land, but there's nobody there. Some communities, they tell you there was a community here, it's gone. There was a mosque here, it's gone. It's wiped out. So there's that aspect of infrastructure that is really haunting, to see the inequality, how protection itself is operating in a sphere of inequality. And you can see it visually, where it begins and where it ends and why. And the people, is not lost on them. We're not coming to tell them, oh, look at it. They know, they have the sense that this is happening. Of course, the big men are experiencing it as well, but they have the cushion. You can see them build houses and they'll tell you, oh, this big man built a house, he's abandoned it. The water chased him away. But you know, many of these people, they tell me, don't even live in Lagos. Some of them live abroad. They come in only a few times. So whatever, they caught their loss, they sort of weave that into the sort of planning of it. If they can get like 2-3 years out of it, that's fine. So there's more latitude within it. So they are impacted, but not in a way. And I also think you would know as well, researchers, students, academics, when they come to Nigeria, when they come to Lagos, they go straight to the island. That's the most sick. They are told already, that's the most secure place you have to go, Victoria Island. So when I walk on the streets of Victoria Island, I run into all sort of people. In fact, if I want to meet my colleagues from Michigan, my colleagues from Sub Cornell, I see them in the streets of Victoria Island because I'm gonna, hi, this one going for a jog, this one running. Everybody has their local fixers. My flight is so and so. Pick me up at airport, straight to the island. They bypass the mainland completely. The hotels like Radisson Blue with security details and the rest. So in a way, the academia itself is, we cannot just be people who study these spaces. Are we ourselves part of the shiny city? And in what ways then can we sort of make sense of this ambivalent complicity of being part of the system that we ourselves are criticizing? And I think this is a question that always haunts me each time I'm on the ground. But they are excellent questions. Yes.
Okay. Hi. I really love that you are bringing attention to creative and cultural productions. Just last week, I was I was a panelist for The Legend of the Vagabond Queen of Lagos. I don't know if you've seen the film.
Yes.
Very brilliant. And it took them 8 years to make this film. And when you were talking, I was like, I wish I was here to listen to your presentation before going in there, because there was a lot that you said that touched on that. But I was wondering, how do you balance the ethics of seeing as a researcher, right? And the politics of getting engaged with these communities that you work with? Because I asked that because of, like, you know, when you talk about Afrobeats artists, and when I think about filmmakers and the ways that they are thinking about these communities, I see some of those projects as sort of like an activist intervention. And so I wonder, for us as researchers who do the work of like writing about, reading about, like seeing all of these things, and then we publish, and it's sometimes like the communities don't often see us on the long term. How do you balance the acts of doing and also seeing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And seeing is, we have to make sense of, going back to the question earlier, doing. How do we interpret doing? What is doing for us? Everybody has to make sense of that. In my case, I talk about doing as, for example, I started when I apply for grants now, I demand for the public facing aspect. I want to have a filmmaker and I want to create in a budget somebody who comes in and engages and not just produces a manuscript for publication, but produces images, pictures, do exhibitions, have videos that communities can, consume, that people themselves can sort of can watch and see and evoke. And politicians themselves, sometimes when you can produce all the books in the world, but if you show them a short video, it evokes a certain kind of emotion and affect in a way that writing cannot do. Of course, the mission of publishing and writing is very important, and you must speak and engage with that space. But it's just, can we be hybrid? Can we do more? And I think the other way is to think with the local community. And, these days it's become more fashionable to talk about co-produced knowledge and research and the rest. I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to a little bit of that co-produced knowledge. Yes, but in a sense, I still feel like there's a power dynamic that we would need to reconcile with. One community member once asked me when I was on the ground, says, "What is your agenda?" And I found that question very haunting and disturbing. Because agenda, not least because agenda seems a bit political. And I didn't know how to answer it. What is my agenda? Should I answer it from the fact that I was on a tenure track and I had to collect data in a way that fits within that tenure track and take the data they are asking, but still tailor it through a literature that allows me to go straight to tenure, right? And so in a way, distorting it or delaying writing what I'm supposed to write. How should I think about this? Or the fact that perhaps my own decision in placing it in a certain kind of publication space rather than in another space that I know will be more engaged with itself was for my own gain. So there are all these questions that we have to grapple with. I can't tell you that I have the answer to it. It's just to say we need to raise them. And ethics is about raising them and grappling with them. And there's a sense of liberation in recognizing that it's not finished. It's not finished, and the point is not to finish it, but is to raise them and grapple with them on the field, and each one will have to do it in their own way from their standpoint position.
Hi, I'm Jack Muskowski, a fifth-year architecture student, and I was just kind of wondering, given that Eko Atlantic is now partially completed, do you think there's anything that could be done to like transform or slightly redevelop it in a way that would be more inclusive to the rest of Lagos?
I don't know if it's partially completed. If you go to it, have you been at all? Okay. If you go there, you would see that it just looks like a ghost place. It's like nobody is inhabiting this space. But they keep pointing to me that the US has acquired several plots as a kind of a legitimation of what's going on. They are desperately trying to, show some important personalities to legitimize why it is viable. So it feels to me that even within Eko Atlantic, they themselves are not sure if this is a viable project. It seems like they are trying to, and there's this hush-hush, they are all trying very protective of certain things. So I don't know, the word completion itself, it just seems to me like, I don't know when, if it would be complete. And I won't be surprised if it's never completed, because there are many white elephant projects like that, not only in Nigeria, in many parts of the world that remain incomplete, around which then rumors and myths begin to build up. But I think the questions, but what is clear though is that once you move away from Eko Atlantic itself and go into the surrounds, when I went there, it was like a movie. It was just people standing by as their shelters, their makeshift shelters was being cleared. And immediately they clear them and the police moves on, they come and start the rebuilding. So it was just, it was just right there in your own very face, the clearing that we're talking about, but people defiantly refusing to go away because they have no place to go. because there's just no plan for them. So I think it's that kind of drama of life that is unfolding, in which it's not so much completion as the unfinished and what we do with something that is unfinished. In many sense, if it's complete, there's a sense of relief. It's the fact that nobody knows when, if it will be complete, and so they can't plan.
Hello, my name is Tian. I'm a first year MRP student, and my question's about how can we change the perception of building materials, because it tends to be in two categories, informality or formal. For instance, bamboo, it seems like the government saw this as informal, destroyed it, while the brick has more permanency. But then, you know, that village was built on sticks, but then you have Venice that's also built on logs. So how can we change that?
Makoko, one of the communities that I mentioned, is called, quote unquote, the Venice of Africa, right? It's a floating community built on stilts, has existed for more than 100 years, has various languages. It's a diverse community there, and they have floating schools, floating hospitals. They navigate on boats, so markets were on boats. So that itself is incredible. They've learned to live on water. It's incredible innovation and creativity. But is that formal? Or I don't even know, how does the state see what is going on? Do they even see what is going on there? For a long time, Makoko was just off the Third Mainland Bridge as you cross from the mainland to the island. They are there, but not there. Most Lagosians know that there is some community there, but they've never been there. They just point there. There are some people there, and nobody knows what's going on there. There's a certain kind of invisibility that is also both protection for the community, but also violence on the community. So and now the government has decided that for a long time, this community is an eyesore. We don't want people crossing over into the island and seeing these things. So what they're doing now is that they're not claiming sand, they are sand filling the community so that their livelihood will be gone. So I think you raise an important question about what is the line between formal and informal. And I think the way in which we can get to it is to break away from the hegemony of the English language and say, is there even a translation for that in the local Yoruba language, Hausa language? What is formal in Yoruba? I don't know. I speak fluent Yoruba. I don't know what is formal. The lines between these things are very blurry. Where does the government end and the society begin? People don't have this Bavarian logic of the state and society being so uniquely distinguished. And the kind of logic that we too often have been trained in and then go and sort of reproduce. And without thinking about design as language, as linguistic aspect itself and how it lands for people in their imaginary. And I think once we come to that, we realize there's so much the line between it's the line between seeing and being unseen. Like in South Africa, when I studied there, when South Africans see you, they will say South World, which is I see you. And the point here is that people don't feel that they are being seen, or they are seen in a way that does damage to them. So I think those are the questions, the stakes, the underneath of the distinction. What is really happening here is really saying that some people belong. The classic George Orwell, right? Some are more. So some animals are equal. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. This is really what is going on. You're not fully incorporated into the community of humanity. So your death, as Judy Butler says, is not really. And so we don't really care what happens to you. This is the essence of disposability, fungibility, right? It's what we see, and it's not limited. Once we begin to ask those questions, then we see very clearly that we're not talking about Lagos there. We're talking about many places in the world today, in which the logic of that applies. So those things is just getting away from these sort of binaries that traps us within a particular hegemonic language. I'm beginning to see, take a linguistic turn to get into people's philosophy and everyday imagination. And all of a sudden we'll see it's not really binary. There are more fundamental questions, like questions about who is not.
That was a great answer. I don't want to interrupt it. Thriving populations frequently have an ecosystem of civil institutions, and I think we're all thinking about that as we watch our own being destroyed, but which are missing to turn those good laws? I think you said they're great laws, but they're not turning into better conditions for the urban poor. And then also the discussion of the academic community. Is it possible that the academic community, yourself and your colleagues, could define that missing civil institution that might help? So for example, police brutality got protested for a reform in an existing civil institution, but is there one that you can point to or determine would work in Lagos, such as like a officer sustainable community ancestry or something, some sort of missing civic institution for mobilization to be around so that it would be a specific goal?
No, that's a great question, because you're pointing at not just what is not working, but what is working and what we can then build on to look at what is working. When the police brutality happened, people called for better salaries for the police. People called for more awareness of mental health when it came to the police. These young people were calling for those questions and demanding that the conditions of policing itself is not our service. And I think that is those kinds of narrative in that sense that Chinua Achebe calls a balance of story that is required. And I think unfortunately we see that from the bottom up. We don't see that from the politicians in Nigeria evoking that balance of stories. And I think young people, we can see that is working, because we can see, for example, think about the Afrobeat industry, the way in which it is thrived, despite even because of all the challenges that it faces. How young people have insisted on making do and making a mark at the global stage in such a way that our politicians now thrive on the positive energy being derived from that. And I think that is something that is working. You know, the creative sector, the entrepreneurial sector, and that is working. And for a long time, Nigeria feeds on that kind of energy of young people who are, despite these challenges, you know, going places, as they say. So there's a lot to do that, but you don't want to be resilient all the time. If resilience become your strongest asset, there's a problem. You don't want to get past the fact that there is a failure somewhere, and call it what it is. The state is dysfunctional. And young people themselves and people themselves then have to become the state in that sense. And it's how do we hold this narrative of celebrating what Rem Koolhaas was saying, the improvisation and creativity and tenacity, but at the same time, recognizing there's a reason no one should be in this position where creativity is their biggest asset. There's a system that is not working, and that has to be called out. Otherwise, then the politicians instrumentalize this creativity and say, this is who we are creative people. We always survive against all odds. Millions of money are being looted, and nobody's accounting for that through these public-private partnerships. The young people see that, you know, they're creative as well in using those narratives. When you get all these sort of Nigerian Prince emails in your, I don't know if they make it into the school email account, note how the plot is always, I am the lawyer to the late president of Nigeria, General Sani Abacha. Managed to secure some of the wealth that he looted. So I'll be willing to share some with you if you share your email and cover your student loans and the likes. But they are appropriating the discourse that is happening there, and they're using it to sort of cut a share for themselves in a space where repatriated money does not make it down, does not trickle down. We're saying, how do we cut a share? So we're going to try to use those stories as social capital to leverage some kind of economic capital for ourselves. So in a way, there are smarts and there are creativity and entrepreneurship. But they are coming against the backdrop of a system, an adult system that has failed them, if you want to put it that way, in an African sense.
I think we have a question from our online attendees. Adela, if you are here, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi, how are you? My name is Adele Dahari. I am a senior in arts and science. And I guess the question that I wanted to ask kind of relates to the role of expansion. I think we live in a world where expansion is inevitable along with, its societal and environmental consequences. But I was kind of curious about your opinion on whether or not you think there's a reality in which expansion does not have to be so brutal and, how that would take form in a place like Nigeria.
Yeah, no, expansion. I think expansion goes with keywords like progress, modernity, and modernization. And there's a sense in which speed has become normalized as something that we should all embrace. But why should we? Why should we settle for expansion? Why should expansion be something that we have to accept and walk within the frame? Can we step out of these meta-narratives and question whether this is really working? Certainly going back to natural solutions and thinking about the indigenous mentality and philosophy, they will question whether this is actually the pathway forward to well-being. And I think this is a question that what has it gotten us, certainly from the point of view of the surrounds? What has this expansion? Instead, we've not witnessed expansion, we've witnessed encroachment, right? Encroachment. So I think that's something that I'm willing to begin to question about whether the language of development, one that I studied as a student, is really a language that does violence itself to realities. And I think that's really the point that is in my head. And I'm thinking also about questions of ethics as well. What is there anything like ethical expansion? I don't know what that would look like on Lagos Island, which has a history, a long time, where people already in the 1880s were protesting because they didn't even have a place to bury their dead, because there was no space. The cemeteries themselves, the dead were being flushed out to sort of create new buildings in New Lagos. So I think before we come to expansion, is to recognize whether some spaces are regarded as spaces and whether some spaces are non-spaces made up of anonymous and depersonalized subjects, and that therefore people can expand into, because they are not really places that are owned or secured. I was talking about Christian Mann, the historian, writing about 16th century Lagos and saying, these Portuguese didn't even recognize that people were living here. I mean, there were fishing communities living here for all these decades, and they just completely, they didn't appear on the map. So in essence, then they were just building on nothing, right? The land reclaimed by Eko Atlantic it was from Babbage, which was one of the, growing up, I'm sure you heard stories for people who were in Nigeria of, Babbage was the place where the common person went to relax on weekends. It's now all sort of modified into this climate urbanism narrative. Oh, the sea stole the land and we took it back. Well, if the sea stole the land and you took it back, why don't you take it back and give it back to what it was before, a popular space for encounter? But instead, you reclaimed the land and then you built this superstructure and walled it essentially from the surrounds. So I think the question of expansion itself, we need to step out and critique what that means and what are we expanding into, and how do we regard whether these places we're expanding into are really places in our minds, or they are non-places characterized by people who are disposable. And I think that's the question in my mind that your question evokes.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm John. I teach GIS here. Thank you for your presentation. My question is kind of touching on a lot of things that you already kind of, hinted at.
Yeah.
With respect to the specific Eko Atlantic project, are there one or more specific, stakeholders that have more influence in this type of development that's really driving it? Like you mentioned, Radisson and Hilton,
Yeah.
right? Like, are they the ones really like causing all this actual displacement, or is it that, everybody is getting a piece of the pie, or is one entity driving, this kind of stuff more than others?
The multiple entities, the Shaguri group that I mentioned, they were key funders of the Clinton campaign. So they themselves have a whole history funding the former dictator General Sani Abacha, who looted incredible amount of money, financing some powerhouses elsewhere. So they themselves are a very tricky agent to deal with because they are complicit with the state. But there's also stakeholders on the ground and that have been quiet so far. You think about Nigeria is often described as one of the most religious cities on earth. Where are the Catholics? Where are the Muslims? Where are these Pentecostals? Are there even evidence of these places opening their space as sites of mobilization and change and leading from the front? There's a certain kind of silence sometimes, and with that, a certain kind of power. Because this is a space where religion can really come in. And the man of letters, quote unquote, could become the man of God coming into this space. Academics are writing about it and doing something about this. But what you have, unfortunately, is not a philosophy of binaries, but hybridity. You have complicity, where the man of God himself has 3 or 4 or 5 helicopters, all your children abroad, and constantly, in the name of poverty, thrives on the poverty machinery to tell them that, there is another world in heaven. So there's those kind of stakeholders that have vacated their spaces or aligned themselves with the powerful strategically. And that means then that people on the bottom either have to fit in or find a way of mobilizing their own sort of microscope, hence the fatigue of globalization.
Would you say that the impact of money is limited by the culture and the landscape at the local level?
I think the allure of money remains very powerful, and that's very clear to see when you think about, the famous Danfo slogans, love, money is love, and you see that everywhere, even in Nollywood and the rest. Money is really still holds sway. And you just need to, and I quote a lot from informal transport because this is my kind of first love. That's where I do my research. And when I get into this transport, somebody just gets up and begins to preach in the car. It always finds a way of telling you that poverty is a curse and you need to break that curse and the rest. So there's still the sort of the monetization of religion that allows for the complicity of these two realms, and therefore the vacation of the prophetic voice that should emerge, even within the indigenous level, the baales, the chiefs, the local chiefs, customary traditions as well. What you find is we're asking these people, how do you allow people to build on this your land? You are the baale here. There's a whole lot of alliances that is happening. You can't just say, well, let's turn away from the state towards the customary rule, because the line is not very clear. And so hybridity itself, hybrid governance, what we see here, rather than a sort of a barbarian governance at play here, where there's a sense of incompleteness. As Francis Nyamjo, the Cameroonian, says, every actor looking to complete themselves in one way or the other. Sort of these strategic sort of alliances that you see on the ground. And of course, the everyday people themselves then turn to themselves. They become the infrastructure that stitch each other. And this is why Simone is right when he talks about people as infrastructure, because this is all they have within themselves in the community. And again, I say, I'm observing a certain kind of fatigue of the whole literature. It's not landing for me. And there are many senses in which people are really saying, we're out. We've just mentally checked out of this space. We don't believe in this narrative or social change happen. How do we deal with that as researchers who naturally go in with hope? And I think that's the challenge that I have. Who do you turn to when the very pastor in your church is the one demanding, when you go and there's offertory and you put in $5, it says that's not enough, calls you out and shames you in front of the congregation and say, look at this person for all the miracles. Look at $5, that's not enough, and it's going to step into one of the fanciest car and zoom off. So there's that aspect as well. The prophetic voice is not there. So there's a lot of layers to the narrative, understandably.
We are at the end of our session. We will go to Simply 105 for a talkback session with Daniel. So please join us for informal chat with Daniel. So let's thank Daniel again for this very insightful talk.